Welcome to Raw Food. What's going on, ladies, gentlemen, beings, and everybody in between as we survive another episode of Earth? Here on the West Coast, the temperature has remarkably dropped by 20 degrees. So we have officially entered what is fall and dangerously approaching us with the speed of fire. Winter out here on the East Coast. Did I say West Coast? East Coast. You are out on the West Coast, and perhaps that's why I am thinking of the West Coast, because it has got to be warmer, although up north, closer to where you are, it has also gotten quite chilly, is my understanding.
Yes, very.
Nonetheless, we've had quite a few weeks since we've chatted last. We have had an election cycle. We have had a new Omicron variant. Alex Jones has been hit with the $1.4 billion damage suit in the Sandy Hook ruling. The housing market has come to a screeching halt now that interest rates have gone up and the COVID flight has stopped. And Kevin McCarthy has announced he wants to be the House Speaker, and there was no red wave as expected. It was, at the very least, a red glass of Kool-Aid at best, but that was about it. What say you, other than the fact the world is losing its mind over Elon Musk buying Twitter? Where shall we begin, my friend?
Let's just jump right into these election results. I don't think anyone saw it exactly playing out like this. At the same time, I still do believe the Democrats could have done better.
Absolutely. But they did better historically, considering usually is my understanding that the sitting administration usually is the one that holds on during the midterm seats.
They're the ones that lose.
They're the ones who normally lose during the midterm seats. Oh, yes, you're correct. Because under Bush, Obama, and Clinton, each person lost anywhere between 40 and 60 seats, I believe. And in this election, and Trump. And in this election, the Democrats only lost about a dozen or so seats. Nonetheless, they were still able to maintain a very narrow lead. So neither side swept anything. And I think people underestimated how much abortion rights was not only going to impact the election, but people can hold multiple thoughts in their brains at the same time. They can be concerned about the economy. They can be concerned about women's rights. They can be concerned about saving the democracy, and they can be concerned about guns all at the same time. And I think that manifested at the polls. What say you?
I totally agree. And I'd also add the fact that if you want to peel back some layers about it, yes, abortion absolutely played a huge role. Gen Z showed up and showed out. They definitely
showed up. And not only did they show up, they overwhelmingly voted Democrat. I believe the latest statistic I saw was 63% of Gen Zs, which is ages 18 to 29, showed up at the polls voting Democrat 63% of the time.
Yep. And this didn't show up in the pre-election polling. Want to know why? Because when you're polling people and you're calling them from an unknown number, guess who's not going to pick up? Gen Z. You already have a very low likelihood of anyone picking up, but Gen Z absolutely is not picking up that phone call from a random polling company or replying to that text from a random polling company.
They hardly make phone calls. They hardly make phone calls as it is, let alone from strangers.
Thank you. So they missed. The polls missed.
The polls missed across the board. Disappointingly, Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock are now in a runoff. It's a disgrace that it's even that close. And I say that politics aside, not because of politics. Herschel Walker, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, I don't care what he is unqualified to be in a position that is representative of the people in the allegedly most powerful political body in the land. It's shameful. And what's the most disgusting part about that is that evangelicals did not choose to vote and throw their weight behind the reverend. They threw their weight behind the football player who seems to manifest everything they claim to be against. He is the epitome of what they can't stand about Black people. And yet wheeled him out because they thought just him being a black football player was enough to get people to the polls and be a competitor to Raphael Warnock. And sadly enough, their strategy seems to be working. What say you?
I mean, we talked about this earlier. It is kind of fucking ridiculous that this person who represents all of the negative stereotypes about black men that specifically Republicans in places like Georgia believe about black men. This guy embodies, oh, he's athletic. Oh, he's got a history of violence. Oh, he's got multiple baby mamas and kids that he didn't take care of out of wedlock, paid for abortions, not very smart, not qualified for his job, not very articulate. And he's going to do what he's told.
Ticks every box.
Wouldn't have a problem if it were like we talked about before, a Thomas Sowell type or an Alan Keyes or a Larry Elder type. If you wheeled out a black
intellectual conservative, right? Why don't they? Why do they keep wheeling out entertainers, rappers, and athletes?
Because that's how little they think of us.
Well, based on the polls, maybe they're onto something, because he shouldn't have come within a land shot of Warnock. And I don't understand how Christians are not voting for the Reverend.
Thank you.
But again, I'm at a loss at what people think Christianity is and how they express it, because it always seems to be incongruent.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. He paid for abortions, but he's going to vote. He supposedly is going to continue to vote against abortion.
Okay. Makes sense. I mean, it sounds like most Christians, hypocritical and judgmental about everybody's sins except their own.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So it sounds pretty normal to me.
Mm-hmm.
The runoff is expected to end when? Do we know?
Let me look it up.
In the meantime, another thing to take note of is that there were two major LGBT wins. Two lesbians won in an unprecedented win as well for the nation. And Fetterman beat Dr. Oz, thankfully, by a decent enough margin to send a message to the carpetbaggers like Dr. Oz to go back to New Jersey, where he normally lives. I think he was not seen as one of the people by the Pennsylvanians. And I think it's even fun. There's a comedian who cracked a joke and said, how bad do you have to be as a candidate to lose against the guy who can't talk? Obviously, cracking a joke on John Fetterman having a stroke, but nonetheless, I mean, Dr. Oz did lose against somebody who had a stroke, but it doesn't mean just because he had a stroke, he's incapable of doing the job. People have illnesses, people recover from illnesses and still manage to produce a lot of great things. I don't think that should exclude anybody. And like he said, he said he'll be better in January. Dr. Oz will still be a fraud. For me, again, it's politics aside. I think Dr. Oz's his credibility has been questioned several times. And Oprah, who put him on, did not throw her hat behind him. What say you?
No, I was wondering what Oprah would say, because sometimes she sits things out. But, honestly, actually, ever since Obama showed up, she's actually been a lot more politically vocal. She was, strategically quiet before then. So that doesn't surprise me because Dr. Oz's platform is he just ran on being close to Trump. He just ran on MAGA. That was it. So that's an anti-woman platform. So yeah, of course, Oprah said, fuck that guy. And Fetterman, also he branded himself as a no frills type of dude. And he just ran around telling people, hey, look, fuck that guy. I'm actually from here. And yes, he's a populist, but he's just running as a Trump mini-me. And so, yeah, Fetterman, I think he'll be fine. I mean, we all know the senators get incredibly good healthcare, so
for life.
Yeah, he'll be fine. I'm not worried about that. I'm glad Fetterman won.
You are.
Yeah, we'll see how this whole thing shakes out though with the runoff. But it does overall look like the Democrats will have the Senate. Yes. However, because they don't have the House, we're going to have divided government, so they're not going to get anything done. Let's be honest.
So did the Republicans win the House?
It looks like the Republicans are going to have the House, but not by a lot.
Okay.
By a very slim margin.
So the Democrats have the Senate, the Republicans will have the House, and then if Democrats hold their role in the presidency, that would be the deciding factor or give them the majority. What
Yep.
do you make of the sweep of DeSantis in Florida? He won overwhelmingly the majority of the counties in Florida, except for maybe a handful, half a dozen at best. I think the presidential candidacy is going to come down to him and Newsom. What say you?
We shall see whether or not Gavin Newsom runs. Joe Biden probably is better positioned to win a national race more than Gavin Newsom, but some people don't like the fact that Joe Biden's so old. But yes, DeSantis appears to be, the guy who probably has the inside track for the Republican nomination. He's clearly running for president. But Greg Abbott appears to be trying to position himself as well. And it was, there were disappointing results in Texas where Greg Abbott beat Beto O'Rourke. And in Florida,
and Stacey Abrams got beaten. By the way, we have to mention that valiant effort on her part. Although I don't think she galvanized the momentum that she had around her first run.
I think there were a lot of things that Kemp also did to cheat a bit. Since her first run and since the presidential campaign, Georgia has passed a whole bunch of anti-voter laws, voter ID laws, et cetera, that restricted early voting, restricted the number of polling places. And, it goes without saying, what the hell does early voting or how many polling places are open or how late the polling places are open? What do any of those things have to do with voter ID and voter fraud? Right. Exactly. They have nothing to do with it. But yes, ever since, Georgia was running around claiming that Trump actually won the state of Georgia, that is a widely held belief that not only Trump won the state of Georgia, he did not, and that he won the election, he did not. But yes, the Georgia state legislature did pass a whole bunch of voter ID laws immediately following the 2020 election. Similar chicanery happened in Texas. Harris County, which is where Houston is, they usually say, hey, if you're in line before the polls close, your vote will still count. Greg Abbott had the Secretary of State tell the polls in Harris County, oh, you're not actually allowed to count any of the votes that were cast after 8 p.m.
Wow.
Thrown out.
That's shameful. There'll be lawsuits, I think, around that. But by the time the verdict comes in, the election's over, which is ultimately the goal.
And also, there's the only federal protections we have when it comes to voting rights are in accordance with the Voting Rights Act, many of which are civil rights protections. We don't actually have federal standards beyond the parts of the Voting Rights Act that specifically target certain states and called for oversight there. And that part of the Voting Rights Act was gutted by the Supreme Court not that long ago. Okay. So there's not actually much of a federal, whistle you can blow to say, hey, they did this and they violated people's voting rights, unless you make it a civil rights issue and you can prove that there's a racial element to what they did. Now, Harris County being incredibly diverse does appear to there may be evidence of such a violation, but it's harder to prove. And this is again why we need a new Voting Rights Act, which the Democrats were in position to pass before the midterms,
right? But
we were unable to because of Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. Those are the two moderate Democrats who are in red states, Joe Manchin being in West Virginia, Kristen Sinema being in Arizona. Those are the two ones that have kind of held back the Biden administration from accomplishing more. True. And if we talk about the Democrats holding the Senate, do they have enough votes in the Senate to overcome Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema?
Arguably, no.
We'll see how it exactly shakes out. We're going to find out after the runoff.
What do you make of Beto losing again? Is there the curse of the Vanity Fair cover?
No, I don't think it's that at all. I think Texas is going to Texas.
Yeah, but Texas wasn't always red. I mean, Texas actually used to be blue for quite some time and then changed. So it can go back, no?
The way that the Texas state legislature has gerrymandered that state and the voter ID laws that they've passed there, they have set themselves up to make it very, very, very hard for it to become a blue a blue state in terms of its state legislature, in terms of its congressional representation, and in terms of its governorship, because they are willing to do things like, throw out votes in Harris County. They're willing to cheat. Uvalde County, so that's one thing, cheating and whatnot, and just making it harder for Democrats to win there. That's what Greg Abbott and the Republicans in Texas do, right? But also, Texas is going to Texas. Uvalde County in West Texas, where they had this, horrible school shooting. Uvalde County overwhelmingly went to Greg Abbott.
Wow. Still?
Mm-hmm.
I can't reconcile that. What do you make of that, hailing from Texas? Of that town specifically still voting so red?
Texas going Texas. Texas is going to Texas.
Even with the deplorable handling of that school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Now, if you want to peel back the onion on like some demographics, it may be the case that, Uvalde, the school shooting, that was an overwhelmingly Latino school. How many of those folks are actually allowed to vote? And how many of those folks did vote? How many of those folks might have been afraid to vote because they're Latino? Maybe their immigration status is questionable. They didn't want to get in any trouble. I don't know. I do not know. But out in West Texas, you have a lot of Latinos who might not actually be able to vote or might be scared to vote.
I see. When Latinos vote, though, the polls do show that they tend to still lean Democratic, although those numbers are changing. So according to the Georgia governor exit polls, 40% of males voted Democratic versus 68% who voted Republican or voted for Kemp. 61% of females in Georgia voted Democratic. Amongst white votes, 25% voted Democratic, so 74% voted red. Mm-hmm. According to, again, same poll, Latino and black vote was the highest for Democratic voting with 90% versus 9%. But I have to say the Latino and the Asian vote were much closer to 50 than I had expected. The Latino vote was 55% Democratic and the Asian vote was 64% Democratic, which means, to my surprise, I didn't expect it, but the Asians actually voted more Democratic than Latinos. I didn't expect that. I would have thought those results were different. And then if you break it down by race, 25% of the Democratic vote was submitted by whites, and non-whites made up 79% of the votes in Georgia. What say you? What do you make of the Latino and the Asian vote? That Asians are actually voting more Democratic than Latinos in Georgia.
So let's talk. So the one thing that Democrats need to stop doing is thinking of the Latino voters as a monolith. Okay.
None of the races are a monolith.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Latinos in West Texas are more likely to skew. There's probably an overrepresentation of folks that might be undocumented versus Latinos in Georgia and Florida, particularly Florida, because you automatically get a green card or get citizenship if you come over from Cuba, right? So they're not as concerned about immigration as other Latino communities.
Because the Latino community in Miami tends to vote red. So that's why you don't hear much about Cuban migration, but you hear about Guatemalan, Mexican, El Salvadoran, but you don't hear about the Cubans because we have a different relationship with them. And when they do get here, they tend to vote red overwhelmingly.
Yeah, because if you point at someone and say they're a communist or they're a socialist, they're going to be like Castro. If you can paint that candidate as being close to communist, you've got a shot with Cuban voters in Florida, particularly Miami. Yeah,
this is true.
There was also some speculation from some political scientists on Twitter just saying, hey, some of the ways that Democrats went about campaigning in heavily Latino districts didn't really read the room very well and kind of assumed Latinos were as far left as, say, general leftists in San Francisco. It's not really the same.
Right.
Latino voters can be a little bit more socially conservative. They can be a little bit more religious. Again, not a monolith, though, right?
Right.
So Democrats with their virtue signaling and, oh, look at us, we use terms like Latinx, even though there's tons of research that shows Latinos actually don't like people using that term.
Right. It's really a Gen Z term, tail end millennial term. No one over 30 uses Latinx.
Exactly. Exactly. So just not really, solid campaigns that were run. Somebody that was breaking down Florida said, "Hey, there was like a local race for Congress where someone ran. I think they were talking about Val Demings, and they pointed out, hey, like this person had a campaign. No, it wasn't Val Demings. It was someone in a local district that was heavily Latino district in Florida, and they said they did a get out the vote drag show." In a heavily Latino district. Read the room, you guys.
Right.
That works if you're running in San Francisco. I'm not sure if that's going to work. Oh, well, these people are Latino, so of course they're going to be cool with that. No, that's how you get out the vote in San Francisco. That's how you get out the vote in Berkeley. That's how you get out the vote in the Castro. I'm not sure if that's necessarily how you get out the vote in a community. Yes, they might vote blue. Yes, they are people of color, but they're not necessary. They might skew a little bit more religious, and they might not actually, be too energized by that. Furthermore, you just gave, some fodder to the Republicans to be like, hey, look at them, right? So I don't know. Mark Kelly won in Arizona, and he didn't do that. He ran as a Democrat in a red state. He's a doggone astronaut, and he did not, sit there and virtue. I mean, he's an old white guy. He didn't sit there and virtue signal and act like, "Hey, look at me, Yas Queen. I'm doing a get out the vote drag show."
Right. What do you make of? Sorry, I interrupt you. Go ahead.
I was just saying, not saying anything's wrong with that. You and I have been to drag shows before. We love it. I'm not saying anything's wrong with that. I'm just saying, do you want to win or not?
Agreed. What do you make of the fact that most of the election deniers did not hold their seats, and that most of the candidates that Trump endorsed also did not win? Do you think that means Trump's influence on the party has waned?
That's what people are saying. And they're saying that Fox News, like Rupert Murdoch, has made the call to tell everybody at Fox News to blame this on Trump.
They're definitely shitting on him in the Murdoch newspapers. I mean, the New York Post really had him painted as Humpty Dumpty sitting on a brick wall. It was hilarious.
Yeah. And also, let's pay attention. The Democratic National Committee this year openly contributed money to support the cuckoo Republican candidates in their primaries, believing they'd be easier to win. And in a lot of places they tried that, it actually worked. The cuckoo people being the election deniers.
Right. I guess there's hope, although Marjorie Taylor Greene slid into victory. So I wouldn't start toasting champagne glasses just yet, but I don't think either side got the results that they expected. There was no wave either way.
Exactly.
So I guess we'll hold out for the Georgia elections. It looks like Colorado sweepingly went blue, which is a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect Colorado to go completely blue. And we'll see how this eventually impacts the presidential election, which is 2 years from now. A lot can change within the next 2 years. People have short memories. The insurrection committee should be completed by then. We'll see if there's any indictments, and we'll have to clutch our pearls for the Georgia election runoffs, and we'll have to continue the conversation once we know those results.
On this episode of Raw Food.